add seams all the way around it, and now check it out, the final unwrap, and there it is. Beautifully unwrapped mesh. If you've ever played a video game or you've watched an animated movie, then chances are you've already seen something that's been UV unwrapped, because it's required for nearly every textured 3D model. Doesn't matter if it's a character or a house. UV unwrapping is the step you do before you can apply an image texture to a model, because it tells the software the position, rotation, and the scale of the texture on each face of the model. The best way to visualize UV unwrapping is to imagine that your model is made out of paper and you are trying to lay it flat on a surface without tearing it. So in order to do that, what you would have to do is you would have to make cuts in your mesh so that the different parts of the model could unfold without tearing. So as an example, with this cube here, we know that looking from the top, if we were to make 3 cuts along that top lid there, that lid could open. And then if we were to make 2 further cuts, then that whole section could unfold. And then if we were to just do 2 more cuts on the front, then the entire thing would be laid down flat. Now, if you were to have a look at that underneath, that look there, that image, that is the UV image editor. That is what you're looking at when you are seeing an unwrapped mesh. You're looking at it as if it was made of paper and it's laid flat. And in fact, if you were to basically snapshot a texture on top of that so that the texture stuck to the faces and then reassembled it, that is what UV unwrapping is it's putting the texture over those faces that when you see it on the 3D model, that's where the texture appears. And you'll note also, having a look at this, that where there was a seam, where there was a cut, there's a discontinuation of the texture. Whereas where there was no cut, you can see that the texture is continuous. So for this reason, the aim of the game when it comes to UV unwrapping is to generally, you want to lay it flat with the least number of visible cuts possible. So, I mean, there's a few other, there's one exception to it, which I'll mention right at the end of this tutorial, but that is generally the aim 99% of the time. So for this tutorial, I'm going to be UV unwrapping our famous anvil here, which if you haven't got, you can download the file in the YouTube description, and let's get into it. So first of all, let's just try and put an image texture on this anvil. Okay, so first of all, let's give it a materials to start with. And instead of a color for our diffuse channel, I'm going to use image texture. Doesn't matter which image texture you use. I'm just going to be using one off Polygon. I'll put the link in the YouTube description if you want. But it's just this one. It's a white and brown looking patchy thing. It'll allow us to see, you know, how the texture looks on our model, which is all we want. Okay, now we've done that. So how should it look, right? Well, if you had a model that was UV unwrapped, then you would see the texture on the model, but clearly ours is not showing up. And the reason for that, of course, is that it is looking for UV information which currently does not exist. So if we were to split our view here, and actually I can just shrink that because I don't need that anymore, or at least for the moment. If we were to open up the UV image editor right here, if you were to select your entire mesh in edit mode, if you had a mesh which had been UV unwrapped, you would see information here. And by information, I'll show you in a second, but you would see it there. So the fact that we don't see anything, we just see a blank grid, that means that we haven't UV unwrapped our mesh yet, which is, yeah, true. That's why we're doing it as a tutorial. So let me show you the quickest and the easiest, the laziest way to UV unwrap something. And that is to use, first of all, with everything selected, if you were to hit U, which is U for unwrap, out of all these options here, if you were to click Smart UV Project, and then just click OK on these default settings, you would get this. So it's UV unwrap the mesh automatically, and if we were to look at it in texture view mode, like that, then you would see that the texture has been applied to our model. So you might be thinking, well, that's fantastic. Why is there so much more left of this video, right? Why is it so long when clearly it looks perfect? Well, it might look perfect at first, but actually if you were to zoom right in there, you would see some problems. The biggest one is right here yeah, on the base here. You can see what, I mean, it looks like a glitch in the texture, but really that is because of that step that we just did. When we hit U and we clicked Smart UV Project, we left it up to the computer. We left it up to Blender, I should say, to basically cut up our mesh, which is really what UV unwrapping is, inserting cuts into the mesh and then throwing those pieces of the mesh over here on the right-hand side, doing that automatically. And it does an okay job, but you often see problems with it, which is why I generally never use this. I mean, I don't know. If it's something I don't care about, it's going to be in the background. I might use it just because it's so quick to do. But generally, you always get a much better result when you manually unwrap your mesh by hand, which is what I'm going to show you in a second. We are going to disregard all of this, or just ignore it really, because we are going to be doing it the manual way. Okay, so yeah, imagine that the anvil is made out of paper right now and you have to lay it flat. Where are you going to put the cuts? And more so because you need to have cuts in it, and whenever there is a cut, there's going to be a discontinuation of the texture. So really you want to put the cuts where it makes sense. So you can imagine that, you know, this anvil here, we're going to be putting a texture on it like dirt or grunge, maybe some scratches and some scrapes, right? Well, you know that looking at this, if there was a scrape that was, say, to go across here, it wouldn't make sense for the scrape to go around that 90-degree corner there. Okay, so it actually makes sense to have seams in your texture in certain places, like on that edge there. So that's the easiest thing to start with. Let me just turn off this grease pencil tool here. And actually, I should turn on the screen keys tool. There we go. Okay, so let's start by putting in some cuts. So the way that you do a cut, they're called seams, so I'll just call them seams, is by first of all, you select the edge by holding down Alt and then clicking. Oh, hang on. I'm in the wrong selection mode. So clicking on the edge right there, holding down Alt as you click, that'll select the whole edge loop. Then you hit Control E. This will bring up the edge selection here, and then you want to click Mark Seam. Okay, now when you do that, when you have a look at it in wireframe mode, you can see that it's now red. So that means it's got a seam there. So yeah, we just want to continue this for the rest of the model. So just like I put one there, I know that if there was a scrape, it wouldn't be going around that corner there. So I'm going to put another seam right here, Control E, Mark Seam. All right, and let's just do the exact same thing for the other side. Mark seam, Mark seam. Another really easy place where I know that there would be a seam is along the bottom here. And it's generally the easiest one for whatever model you're doing. Like if you've got a character, you know that you can put a seam around the soles of the shoes, because there's no way you would want to have a texture continue around that angle there, right? And also you're not even going to see it most of the time. The camera's not going to be looking underneath this anvil. So yeah, so we know we can put a seam there as well. So let's just hit Mark Seam there. Okay, now, if we were to UV unwrap this, so before we selected everything, we hit U and then we hit Smart UV Project. When you're doing it this manual way, putting in the seams yourself, instead of Smart UV Project, you want to hit Unwrap. Okay, which looks very different, okay? You can see that we've just got two objects here. Okay, so when you're looking in UV edit mode here, by the way, a few shortcuts to help you out. So middle mouse button will be the, you can move around the view here, scrolling in and out, that's zoom, and then the same keyboard shortcuts that you're used to over here, such as A to select everything, G to move it around, all that stuff, that also works over here. So A to select everything, deselect, I can select this part of the mesh. Actually, let me just turn this little thing off. Sometimes it's good to have it on, sometimes it's annoying. If I mouse over this selection here, if I hit L, that's going to just select anything which is connected to that island. So these are called separate islands here. So we've got two islands. I know I'm giving you a lot of information right now, but yeah, there's two islands. Now the reason that they are separated is that there is a complete severance. Is that right? Severance? Like if you were to sever someone's head. What I'm saying is that there is a cut that goes all the way around this. So therefore, it's now cut off. Like it was made of paper, it would now be separate to the rest of it. Now to show you an example, if I was to make just one little cut here where that's not a seam, if I was to unwrap this, you would see that they are now joined at just that tiny little place. Okay, so yeah, this will make more sense to you the more experience you get with UV unwrapping. But yeah, just for now, know that there's islands. Okay, so this is how it's looking right now. Now let's add a few more seams. So we know that if we were to try to flatten this, we would need to add a seam along here. And also it makes sense, like you wouldn't want to have a scratch that goes around that corner there. So we can make that a seam as well. And let's do another seam right here. And another one on that side to make it equal. Okay, and let's have a look at that now. You unwrap. Okay, cool. Okay. So really what you're looking for, like when you're looking at this, is when you've finished when there is no more distortion in the mesh. So how do I know if there's distortion looking at this? Well, if you've been UV unwrapping for a while, you could probably have a look at this assortment mess here and go like, yeah, there's some serious distortion going on. But actually there's a tool in Blender, a little trick. A lot of people don't know it exists, but if you hit N, that brings up this toolbar here. There's one that says stretch in the display. Now when you enable stretch, what it's doing is it's basically applying a heat map over the UV image editor to show you any place where the UVs are currently stretched. And it is completely interactive as well. And this is really handy. So blue means that it's completely flat, so it's A-OK. Anything other than blue, as you can imagine, green, and then it would eventually go yellow and red if it's severely stretched. Like if I was to drag that out, you can see how the colors change, right? So this is telling us that, yeah, we've got some work to do. So the majority of those colors there are because we've got this horn. So as you can imagine, if this was made of paper, there's no way that you could lay this horn flat without stretching or ripping the paper. So we want to add in some cuts. So for starters, it would make more sense if we were to just sever that entire section of the map so that it can be free. Okay, so there we go. So now it's free to sort of distort itself without changing the rest of our mesh here. That's why it sometimes helps to make a lot of cuts and sever things. So I also know, yeah, these corners here. This is the process that I use when I'm UV unwrapping. I'm just looking at the model and I'm thinking, where should there be a cut? Where does it make sense for there to be a cut? I know it makes sense for there to be one there. So let's UV unwrap that. Okay, cool. So we were now able to sever that part of it. So this part is now free. It's no longer being stretched around. Let's have a look. Actually, we don't need to put another seam across there. We could if we want to. All right, let's, okay, so this area right here, this is definitely going to have some stretchiness on it. And we know that if we were to look at it, if I was to turn on sync, if I select this, you can see that it's that part of the mesh there. So if you don't know what you're looking at, which one has the heat on it, you can just use that sync selection there and then just click it. Right. So I need to sever this from the rest of it for starters. So I'm just going to put a seam all the way around it. And now if I UV unwrap it, it disappears and it's now appeared over here. Okay, and this one's really easy to do. I mean, this is the inside of that hole. The hole which I learned from all the YouTube comments. If it's an anvil, there's supposed to be a hole that goes straight through the anvil at the bottom. I had a look at reference photos for like a month of different anvils, and I never actually saw a photo from the top. So yeah, if you want to, that can be your homework. You can put a physical hole in your anvil that goes all the way through. I don't think anyone would ever notice it, so it doesn't matter. So to UV unwrap this is pretty simple. It's the inside of it. Doesn't really matter where you put the cuts. You're not really going to notice them. But just like if it was a cube, I'm just going to put them on those corners there. And now, if I UV unwrap this, haha, look at that. It's that easy. Okay, so that is a perfect example of going from stretched to non-stretched. Okay, all right, so this whole area here, which is looking very stretched, that is the horn. Okay, so I know that, yeah, we can put another seam here. Basically, wherever there's a 90-degree angle, you can feel free to put a seam in. So actually, this anvil is quite simple, really, because there's a lot of 90-degree cuts and places where you would typically see a seam in real life anyway. If you're doing a character, it gets interesting with the face. because you know, there's places where you have to put a seam in there. You don't really have a choice. So yeah, so let's put a seam here. And let's just have a look at this. And actually, I'll show you, by the way, because when you're looking at this heat map thing, you're sort of thinking like, okay, why does it even matter if it is stretched? I'll show you. So if we were to have a look at this in textured view mode, you can see that the rest of our model looks really good right now. Let me get a drink. It looks really good, except for the horn. Okay, so that is what happens when you've got stretching going on in your UV layout. You've got blurriness, and that's really, really undesirable, because really, this floor here is going to represent an image. So an image, let's say it's a 2K image, 2000 by 2000 there. So this horn section here has been reduced to this tiny section of the grid floor, which might only be, I don't know, 200 by 200 pixels, for example. Which means when you're looking at this whole horn here, it's trying to stretch those 200 pixels over that giant section of the horn there. So obviously, it's not looking correct. So the horn, let's get to it. I know that I can put another loop cut around here because that horn, there's a very harsh cut there. So let's put another cut all the way around. Cool. Hit Control E, mark seam, UV unwrap it. Cool. Now all we've got is the actual horn itself, this bit. I guess I have to turn that thing off whenever I want to do that island select thing. But this whole section here. So in order to unwrap that, we need to add a seam this direction, like somewhere in that long direction. Because if it's a cylinder, like imagine if you've got a tin of baked beans, you have to, in order to unpeel the wrapper, you have to choose a place to do a cut in order to unpeel it. So a cylinder needs to have a cut in order to unwrap. So if I put it up here, it would be noticeable because typically the camera is going to be above it. So I'm going to put it somewhere where it's unlikely that the camera would see it. So right down there, I'm going to mark that seam. And now look at this. You unwrap. And look at that. So there's still some stretching going on right at the tip here, but the majority of it is now blue, which is fantastic. So to get rid of that stretchiness at the tip there, all I'm going to do is I'm going to add in a cut. Sorry, not a cut. Yeah, a seam right there. Just like if it was made of paper, hit U, unwrap, and look at that. Now, if we have a look at this in the textured view mode, look at that. So you can see we've now got the proper detail that we need to have on the horn. There is a little seam there, but hopefully we won't see it when we position the camera. Hopefully you won't really notice that. There are some cases where you're just going to have a seam, and it might look a little bit ugly. And there's often not really a way around that unless you're using a texture painting software, which I'll mention at the end there. Now there is finally just this little bit up here where there is some stretching going on. So that is because we have got this whole section here, right? And just like the cylinder, you have to add one cut in it. So I'm going to just add a cut right here. Add a seam, and now unwrap. And there it goes. I don't know where it went, but it's all blue. So have a quick look around. Oh, there's a little bit here that will need to be fixed. So let's just see. So I think it is that edge right there. I'm just going to have a look in this select. Yep, it's that edge right there. So I know that if I put a seam there, let's put another seam right here. Whoops, that was a freestyle. What was that? Freestyle edge. Let's do another one on the other side. You could, if you want to, by the way, do a seam all the way up the sides. Sorry, this part. Because there's enough of an angle there that you really, I think it would be okay if there was a seam. But let's just see how this looks now. Unwrap. Okay, that is all pretty much blue. I'm just taking a quick look, making sure there's no other colors. Oh, right there. Okay, so this is just at the top. Some of you probably already spotted it. But we did that step for that part, but not this part. So let's just add seam there. And then, man, getting really minute here. Zoom right in there. Add seams all the way around it. And now, check it out. The final unwrap. And there it is. Beautifully unwrapped mesh. And that is it. So if we were to have a look, whoops, have a look at this in textured view mode, you would see that the texture is now, it's continuous where it needs to be, where it makes sense. This dirt is all in one continuous direction. These edges here, like I said, you could put a seam along that edge there if you want. In my case, I don't think I actually need it. It doesn't look blurry or stretched to me. You've got a seam up here where that bit goes in there, but that's all right. Yeah, so I mean, some people would call that seam undesirable, but really this is the worst it's ever going to look with this texture map on it right now. When you actually get to the texturing stage, yeah, we'll be able to, like, you should generally, you wouldn't have a black and white texture like this that's so severe like that. But yeah, there is going to be a few places that look a little odd right now, but generally this is looking great. Now, this entire video I've been showing you the method of trying to avoid seams, trying to avoid visible seams, we should say, right? That's been the whole approach that we've been doing. But I mentioned at the start that there was an exception to the rule, and that is if you're using the other workflow. So this workflow works if you are taking a texture that you found online or something seamless, and you're just going to be, adding it like this. Because in this case, yeah, it really does matter where the seams are. The only case where it doesn't matter is if you're actually going to be doing texture painting. Okay, so as an example, I can show it. There we go. Here is the anvil, and what I've done is I've just hit U, Smart UV Project, one click, one button. Like I showed you at the start, it's really lazy, and it's cut it up in a really messy way. It had like a huge seam across the front here. So I want to show you now, if I was to use this with texture painting, I'll show you why it doesn't matter. Because this was in texture paint mode, I can actually paint directly onto the model here, right? I'll just show you this really quickly. And you can see that as I'm painting it directly on the model, it's drawing it on the appropriate UV island. So, for example, you remember that we had this really heinous looking seam going across here. Well, you can see I can paint directly across it. It doesn't matter where I paint because it's going to add it to the correct part of the UV layout, which is really cool. And so that's one positive, is that when you're doing this method and when you're doing texture painting method, you can just hit U, and then you save a lot of time because you can just go Smart UV Project. Who cares? Because I'm just going to be painting on top of it. But the downside is that once you have finished your painting, you can't really change anything other than if you were to manually go in there and fix your painting. Like if I decided at this point that the position of these are wrong, or that if something's like overlapping another one, I'll show you. Like if I overlap some of these, right, as an example, if you've got parts of it that are overlapping, it's horrible for texture painting because you'll notice that I'm now painting in more than one place at the time. Like it's painting down there at the same time as it paints it up there. So you can't have overlapping parts of it. And also, if I didn't like the scale of this smoke here, I couldn't just scale this up because now the rest of my painting doesn't fit with it. So you're really restricted after you have finished painting. Like you're set to that, you're banged to rights. Whereas with the method that I showed you in the tutorial, I could I could scale this and go like, yeah, I want to make this texture really, really small. I could have parts of it that overlap. It doesn't matter. I have full control over it once it's finished. So because this is a seamless texture, I can go like bigger than the UV grid, whatever I want. So those are the comparisons there. I think honestly, still probably 98% of the time you're going to be using this method because it allows you the most freedom. And also, if you were to use this method of texture painting, like you can't have any procedural or download any textures really, because if you've got a seam in that texture, that like if you're using this as a mask and you were going to use an actual image texture underneath it, you would still be able to see the seams because the image texture isn't painted on there. Hoping this makes sense. That probably didn't make any sense to you, but yeah, just trust me. Probably like, yeah, so for a few usage cases, if you were working on a movie or a video game and it was a hero asset, you would be painting in everything by hand. That's when you would really care that's when you would use this method, but all the other times you're going to be using this method. And just as an example, this is an asset that was from the Kamen Rider 2, the open Blender movie, and you can see this is the cart, and you can see that they are using the method that I showed you in the tutorial, because all of these UV layouts are overlapping each other, which you obviously couldn't do if there was texture paint involved. In fact, they might actually have 2 UV layouts. I didn't even check that. That's a good point. No, they've only got 1. There you go. But yeah, anyways, so we've spoken about a lot in this tutorial, but I'm hoping that that it made some sense to you. Yeah, that is UV unwrapping. If you found it useful, if it makes sense, please give it a thumbs up so that other people can find it, and leave a comment. Let me know what you make with it. Always interested in seeing what people make. Thank you for watching, and subscribe for more tutorials. If you would like to see our next tutorial in this series, we are going to be what are we going to be doing? We're going to be doing some sculpting on our model, adding in some little details to the anvil, and then we're going to be baking normal, so baking the detail into some normal maps. So go ahead and join me in the next video. Bye.